The future has already declared war on them. A hostile regime, centuries ahead, has reached backward through fractured time corridors to rewrite the present, erase resistance, and overwrite human will. And now, every recruit who survives this moment must enter the Chrono-Warrior Initiation Protocol. They will learn to weaponize minutes. They will learn to manipulate their memories. They will learn to split and synchronize their parallel cells. Because in a timeline under siege, time is no longer a measurement. Time is a weapon. And those who fail to master it will be erased by those who already have.
Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Accept temporal hostility as objective reality. Time fractured for the first time at 0417 Standard Meridian, though no one remembered it happening. That was the nature of a temporal attack. Subtle, precise, executed from centuries ahead by hands the present could not yet imagine. The world awoke, thinking it had survived the night unchanged, but the cracks beneath consciousness told another story. Across the continent-spanning city of Helion Prime, watchers on the upper spires noticed the anomalies first. A boulevard that had existed for generations dissolved into a riverbank. A memorial statue shifted 3 meters to the left, though the concrete around it remained unbroken. And in Sector 19, a mother swore her child had been born with green eyes when the infant in her arms blinked back at her with unmistakable amber. These inconsistencies passed as rumors, ghost stories whispered across food lines and data exchanges, until the first city vanished mid-sentence. It was caught on 12 different aerial monitors, a flawless metropolis named Varosk, bustling seconds before, flickering like an interrupted signal, and then replaced. Not destroyed, not crumbled. Replaced by an older version of itself. Stone towers, markets made of canvas stalls, and oceans of horses that neighed in stunned confusion. A city rewritten by an era that no longer existed. Archivists called it a glitch. Physicists blamed dark matter inversion. But the Chrono-War Division knew better. They'd seen the signs in classified simulations, time hostility vectors, micro-interference points designed to weaken the present by striking where people felt safest. Memory, continuity, identity. The attack was not only happening, it had already happened. And standing amid the shimmering haze of a flickering skyline, Commander Arix Talos watched another building blur at the edges. It glitched like a candle flame starved of oxygen, oscillating between steel, then glass, then stone. Each shift lasted less than a heartbeat, but he had learned to notice the smallest fluctuations. He had trained himself to listen to the quiet hum that preceded every alteration. The hum, always the hum. A motif threading through the wounded timeline. A prelude to interference. He touched the device at his wrist, a temporal stabilizer glowing faint blue. It vibrated softly, registering another incursion. The future had found them again. The regime was reaching through time, rewriting the city piece by piece, testing defenses, probing weaknesses. The attack is already happening, Arix whispered, repeating the mantra that every recruit would soon learn. The only choice is whether we evolve fast enough. Behind him, the training cohort gathered on the shattered plaza, new recruits standing among fractured architecture. Some looked terrified. Others stared numbly at the shifting ruins, unable to accept what their eyes displayed. A few whispered questions over and over, as if repetition might restore something that had been taken. What is real? Arix stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of certainty, the tone of a man who had already accepted what the others feared to admit. "Look around you," he said. "This is not destruction. This is replacement. The future regime doesn't waste energy on chaos. They rewrite, they refine, they sculpt the present into something they already control." A recruit near the front pointed to the broken horizon where a tower elongated unnaturally, stretching upward until its shadow bent at impossible angles. "Why do they do this?" she asked. "To weaken you," Arix said. "To soften your identity. To alter your past without permission. If you can't trust your memories, you can't trust yourself. And if you can't trust yourself, you can't resist." Another ripple moved through the plaza, light bending, air vibrating, reality folding like cloth. A flock of birds overhead split into two versions of themselves, one soaring backward, one forward, both dissolving into silence. Arix did not flinch. He'd seen worse. He'd lost more. "This is only the beginning," he continued. "A time hostility vector, a probe, a test. If we pretend this isn't real, the future wins before the war even begins." The hum grew louder. The air trembled. Another section of the city snapped into a different era. Ancient stone replacing neon alloy, cobblestones replacing steel pathways. The recruits stared. Some gasped. One nearly fainted. Arix raised his voice, sharper, more urgent. "Accept the truth that we are under temporal attack. Accept that your memories may not match the world you wake up to tomorrow. Accept that time is no longer neutral. Until you accept this, you are already losing." He paused, letting the silence shape their fear into clarity. "The attack is already happening. The only choice is whether we evolve fast enough." And as another tremor shook reality, the recruits finally understood. This was not madness. This was war.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Stabilize your timeline identity signature. The morning after Varus vanished, the recruits were transported into the Inner Citadel, a structure that wasn't supposed to exist in any single era. Its architecture shifted subtly each hour, sometimes smooth obsidian slabs, sometimes translucent panels filled with drifting particles, sometimes carved stone etched with symbols that hummed softly, always humming, always shifting, always reminding them that time had been compromised. Commander Arix Talos waited for them at the entrance to the Hall of Continuum, a cavernous chamber lined with spiraling light columns that pulsed like slow heartbeats. The recruits walked in cautiously, some glancing behind them, expecting another sudden temporal flicker. The memory of the dissolving birds still haunted their minds. Arix could see it in their posture, the uncertainty, the disconnection, the quiet fear that their memories no longer matched the world they were standing in. Identity fractures, the first wounds of temporal war. He began without ceremony. "You think the future wants your life, but it wants something far more valuable. It wants yourself." The chamber dimmed slightly, and the spiraling light columns responded to the shift, their pulses accelerating. Arix paced before them, voice tightening. When the regime attacks a timeline, their first strike is always the same: identity erasure, not by force, not by violence, by editing. The recruits listened, still as stone. Outside, a faint tremor rolled across the citadel walls, another time hostility ripple passing like an unseen breeze. "They do not need to kill you," Arix continued. "They simply rewrite who you were, who you are, and who you might become." He lifted his hand, and one of the spiraling columns responded to him, projecting a drifting cloud of shifting faces, hundreds, then thousands, expressions morphing, identities rewriting themselves, emotions flickering like unstable holograms. This is what identity erosion looks like. A self that cannot anchor, a self that cannot choose, a self that can be overwritten. One of the younger recruits, Senna, raised her voice, still shaky from the events of the previous day. "If they can edit our memories, how do we know anything we remember is real?" Arix looked at her, eyes unreadable. "You don't," he said softly. "Not unless you build a defense, not unless you construct what we call the signature lock." The light columns dimmed again. A hush swept through the hall of continuum. Even the hum that usually saturated the citadel's air grew lower, more resonant, as if the building itself were listening. Arix stepped onto the central platform, where a circular disc began rotating beneath his feet. Patterns surfaced along its surface, temporal glyphs, fractal shapes, symbols older than recorded civilization. "The signature lock," he said, "is a mental anchor, a structure of self so deeply reinforced that temporal editing can only corrupt it, not replace it. An identity that cannot be rewritten, only tested." He pointed to one of the columns which shifted into a representation of intersecting timelines, each strand vibrating with different colors and intensities. "Your identity exists across multiple timelines. Some versions of you succeeded, some failed, some died, some never came to exist at all. This is your multilinear identity signature, the pattern that defines you across all parallel selves." He paused, letting the recruits absorb it. "When the regime attacks, they target the weakest version of you, the version with the most doubt, the most fear, the version easiest to overwrite. If they corrupt that version, the fracture spread." Another tremor rolled through the chamber, louder this time. The light columns flickered. Arix exhaled slowly, but his voice remained steady. "To stabilize your timeline identity signature, you must reinforce the strongest version of yourself, the one you choose to become, the one that resists." He repeated the mantra slowly at first, then with increasing force. "Hold the identity, guard the identity, reinforce the identity." The recruits repeated it, though some wavered, uncertain, their voices trembling. The columns pulsed brighter, as if responding to the chant. Arix continued, his voice slicing through the trembling air. "You will feel memories shifting. You will notice inconsistencies. People who don't recall what you remember. Events that never happened. Skills you didn't know you had. These are not signs of madness. These are signs of interference." He began walking between the recruits, studying each face. "When your mind begins to fracture, when doubt becomes louder than memory, when your past shifts beneath your feet, remember this: the regime cannot erase the version of you that refuses to be erased." A pulse of energy surged through the hall, so sudden that several recruits stumbled. A column of spiraling light exploded in brightness, sending shards of luminous particles raining down. Arix turned sharply toward the disturbance. His voice dropped to a whisper. "They're pushing harder than expected." The hum returned, no longer subtle, no longer distant. It crawled up the walls like a rising signal.
A warning, a threshold, a threat. Arix faced the recruits again. Your training begins now. If your signature isn't stabilized by the next incursion, you won't survive the rewrite. And as the chamber trembled again, the recruits realized something chilling. They weren't just fighting for the timeline, they were fighting to remain themselves.
Chapter 3 Chapter 3 Reconstruct the Minutes You've Already Lost. The Hall of Continuum dimmed after the last surge, its spiraling light columns slowing until they pulsed with a faint, exhausted glow. The recruits were still shaken, minds racing, memories flickering at their edges like unstable holograms. Identity erosion had begun. But Arix knew the second phase of temporal attack was always worse. Time theft. Not hours, not days, minutes. The small moments, the foundational threads of discipline, clarity, resolve. Moments a person barely notices losing. Moments so subtle they vanish without resistance. As the recruits gathered around him, Arix stepped toward a translucent wall panel. It activated at his presence, swirling into a mosaic of visualized timelines, each represented by continuous lines of light. Some lines pulsed brightly. Others were frayed, flickering, or broken. "These are your minutes," Arix said. "Every decision you've made, every breath, every intention. Time is not a smooth river. It is a sequence of choices stitched together." He pointed to a thread that suddenly dimmed. "And these are the minutes they target first." A hush fell across the room. Arix continued. "The future regime understands human behavior better than we do. They know your greatest victories begin with the smallest choices. A moment of discipline, a spark of focus, a flicker of confidence. They erase these micro-moments, not enough for you to notice, but enough to shift the entire trajectory of your life." A soft hum echoed through the chamber. The familiar motif, the same hum that preceded past distortions. This time, it sounded closer, vibrating in their bones. Senna felt it first. A sudden absence, an unexplained emptiness in her chest. A moment gone. Something she had meant to remember, a thought she'd held only seconds ago, now erased. I forgot what I was thinking," she whispered. Arix nodded grimly. "A stolen minute." He motioned to the recruits to stand in a circle around the timeline panel. The wall brightened, revealing brief flashes of their lost moments, fragments of gestures, half-finished decisions, emotions halted mid-spark. "This is their strategy," Arix said. "Remove 1 minute of clarity and hesitation grows. Remove 1 minute of courage and fear spreads. Remove 1 minute of commitment and the mission collapses." He raised his voice, sharp and commanding. "Recover the minute! Recover the mission!" The recruits repeated the phrase, unsure at first, then louder, reinforcing it as a mantra. Arix tapped the timeline panel. "This is the Reconstruction Protocol, a mental technique designed to restore minutes the enemy attempted to delete. It requires attention, intention, and the ability to slow the mind until it brushes against the edges of fractured time." The panel shifted, showing a slowed replay of a recruit tying their boots, then suddenly forgetting to tighten them. A small moment, almost meaningless, until the simulation zoomed out, revealing that loose boots caused a stumble,
which caused a delay, which altered the recruit's path entirely. 1 lost minute, Arix said, becomes 20 lost outcomes. He encouraged the recruits to close their eyes. The chamber fell silent except for the low hum. Begin reconstruction. You will search for a moment that feels incomplete, a moment that ends abruptly. Follow the feeling of absence. Track the void. Time leaves a bruise when it is stolen. The recruits inhaled deeply. Some saw flickers of memories, reaching for a glass of water, then forgetting why, forming a plan, then losing it mid-thought, standing at a window, watching something they could not recall. Senna found hers, a thought interrupted, a decision she felt she had meant to make. She replayed it, forcing the fragmented moment back into shape. The room around her seemed to thicken, as if reality itself resisted her attempt. Then, clarity. The moment snapped into place. She gasped. Arix turned toward her immediately. "You recovered it?" She nodded. He allowed the faintest smile. "Good. Recover the minute. Recover the mission." But before he could say more, another timeline line on the panel flickered violently, then ripped apart entirely, leaving a void deeper than any they'd seen before. A sharp alarm sounded through the citadel. "No," Arix whispered. "They're escalating." The spiraling column surged with unstable light. The hum intensified, rising from a background presence to a piercing signal. A signal they could no longer ignore. "You cannot escape the signal," someone muttered, a phrase no one remembered learning. The chamber trembled. One recruit cried out. Arix's stabilizer vibrated wildly. A new attack had begun. Stronger, more precise. Not minutes this time. Something bigger. Something dangerous. "Brace yourselves," Arix shouted. "They're shifting timelines again. This time, directly targeting—" The words cut off as the floor dissolved beneath them in a burst of blinding temporal distortion.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. Train the Cortex to predict enemy time distortions. The world slammed back into existence, not gently, not gradually, but violently, as if reality itself had been yanked forward like a snapped tether. The recruits staggered across the fractured ground, coughing through shimmering dust that tasted metallic, almost electric, as if the air remembered being rearranged. Where the Citadel's Hall of Continuum had stood moments before, now rose a cavernous expanse of twisted architecture, half ancient stone, half futuristic alloy, half something else entirely, something that did not belong to any known timeline. Arix Talos hit the ground hard, stabilizer sparking against the temporal debris. He hissed, forcing himself upright, eyes scanning the chaos. The recruits were scattered, but alive. The environment pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat synchronized to an unseen will. This was no accident. This was deliberate placement. "They moved us," Arix muttered. "Not through space, through sequence." The hum returned, not a whisper this time, but a rhythmic pulse in the air. It vibrated through the stone, through their bones, through the fractures of their thoughts. "You cannot escape the signal," Senna whispered, though her lips barely moved. Arix snapped to her. "Did you hear that, or did it arrive in your head?" She shook her head, frightened. "I don't know." Arix cursed under his breath. Temporal distortions had begun. He motioned the recruits toward him, forming a tight circle. Above them, sky fractured like a broken mirror, 3 suns, then none, then one again. Shadows drifted independently of the bodies that cast them. This was a distortion zone, a playground for the regime. "Listen carefully,"
Arix said, forcing calm into his voice despite the growing instability. The enemy can manipulate more than memory, more than moments. They can manipulate thought sequences, insert impulses, reverse intent, amplify doubt. They target cognition itself. He pointed to the distorted sky above them. This, he said, is what a destabilized temporal cortex feels like. The ground beneath them rippled, and for a brief moment the recruits saw themselves, standing in the same circle just 10 seconds ahead. Their echoes moved slightly faster, gestures trailing like delayed reflections, a predictive echo. Arix seized the opportunity. "Look at that!" he shouted. "That is your warning. A distortion always announces itself, never directly, always at the edges. A spark of déjà vu, a sudden hesitation, a choice you didn't mean to make." The echoes froze. Their face melted into static. Then it turned its head sharply toward the real recruits, as if finally noticing them. Arix stepped forward. "Brace yourselves." The construct sprinted at them. Its movements jittered, too fast, too slow, skipping frames of time like a corrupted recording. The recruits stumbled backward, but Arix remained firm. Watch its pattern, not its speed, not its shape, the pattern. The construct lunged, but just before reaching them, it dissolved into a burst of temporal static that washed over their skin like warm dust. Arix looked at the group, breathing hard. "That was your test. A distortion always reveals its rhythm before its strike. If you see the rhythm, you stop the attack. If you don't—" He let the silence finish the sentence. The hum grew louder again, an alarm from the broken sky. Arix's stabilizer vibrated violently. "Damn it," Arix said. "Another wave, stronger this time." The ground shook, the air bent, the horizon folded inward like collapsing fabric. "Hold your positions," Arix shouted, but the world was already falling apart. The next distortion wasn't coming. It had already arrived.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Break the Loop. Override repeated failure cycles. The world reassembled around them with a sickening lurch, one that felt less like falling and more like being copied, pasted, and forced into a shape that wasn't quite right. The recruits hit the ground hard, coughing against swirling dust. The air tasted familiar. Too familiar. Arix Talos rose slowly, scanning the terrain. No, this wasn't random. This wasn't new. It was the training plaza. The same shattered plaza from earlier, the same fractures in the stone, the same scorch mark on the ground. But they had already been here. Senna whispered, trembling, "We're repeating the sequence, aren't we?" Arix nodded grimly. "We're inside a loop." The hum returned, steady, rhythmic, suffocating, not a warning this time, a pattern, a cadence, the same 3 pulses over and over. Hum, 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 pause. Hum, 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 pause. Arix clenched his fists. The regime is testing behavioral collapse. The recruits looked at him, fear rising. He scanned their faces. They were exhausted, not from physical strain, but from repetition, the kind that wears down the edges of identity, the kind that compresses choice into a narrow corridor until the mind stops resisting. He stepped forward, voice sharp. The future controls timelines by trapping you in cycles. They make you repeat decisions, repeat mistakes, repeat hesitations until you believe they are yours. They make you live failure until it becomes your nature. He stepped forward, voice sharp. This is how they win without ever firing a shot. Senna breathed out a shaky whisper. "So how do we break it?" Arix activated his stabilizer, and a projection shimmered upward, a sequence of branching timelines, most looping back on themselves like snakes devouring their tails. He said, "The loop-breaking algorithm. 3 phases." The recruits leaned in. Even the air felt tense, as if the loop itself resisted the explanation. Phase 1. Recognition. Arix pointed to a timeline replaying the moment they first arrived in the plaza. Then again. Then again. You must see the pattern. You must acknowledge you are repeating something. Most never do. He turned to the recruits, eyes severe. Recognize the loop. Say it. "We're in a loop," they murmured. Louder. "We're in a loop." Arix nodded. Good. Phase 2. Disruption. He raised his hand and a forked projection appeared. 2 identical choices, endlessly repeating. They expect you to react the same way, with the same fear, the same hesitation. The loop survives by feeding on predictability. The hum echoed again. Hum, hum, hum. Pause. Hum, hum, hum. Pause. Arix continued. To disrupt it, you must behave outside the pattern. Turn left when you always turn right. Step forward when fear tells you to step back. Introduce randomness. Introduce rebellion. A recruit frowned. "So we just do something different?" Arix shook his head. "No, you do something impossible. You break the expectation." He tapped the projection again. Phase 3. Replacement. The timeline cracked apart, revealing a new path, shimmering, unstable, but free. Once you shatter the old cycle, you choose the new one. You replace the looped behavior with a deliberate action. This is how you create a new timeline, one the regime hasn't mapped. He repeated the mantra, the directive etched in every syllable. The loop is the enemy. The break is the evolution. The recruits repeated it, breath by breath, grounding themselves in the rhythm. A cold wind swept across the plaza. The skyline flickered, glitching between day and night. The loop tightened. The hum grew louder. Hum, hum, hum. Pause. Hum, hum, hum. Pause. The recruits tensed. Their limbs moved on instinct, lifting, shifting, repeating the same motions they had made only minutes before. Arix barked, "Stop!" They froze. "Now," he said, voice steady, "you must prove you can break it." The plaza trembled, the light bent, the air pulsed with déjà vu. A recruit stepped forward and tried to scream, "I won't do it again." But the loop swallowed her words, repeating them back in a warped echo. Arix gritted his teeth. They're tightening control. Recognize it. "We're in a loop," the recruit shouted. "Disrupt it." Senna blinked, then knelt and slammed her palm into the ground, dragging a line across the dust. A mark, a break, something new. The plaza flickered, reality stuttered. Her mark disappeared, then reappeared, then disappeared again. "They're fighting you," Arix said. "Replace the action. Choose the new path. Choose it now." Senna screamed into the distortion. "I choose a new sequence." A thunderous crack tore across the plaza. For one heartbeat, the loop collapsed. The hum changed, shifting into something darker, deeper, almost angry. Arix turned sharply toward the sky. "Oh no," he whispered. The skyline began folding inward, not repeating this time, but collapsing, collapsing, collapsing. "The loop is breaking," Arix said, "but something else is coming through." And as the world shattered into a cascade of spiraling timelines, the recruits realized breaking the loop wasn't the end. It was the trigger.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. Synchronize with your parallel selves. The collapse of the loop threw the recruits into a spiraling corridor of fractured timelines, colors bending, shadows stretching, realities bleeding into each other like threads pulled from a cosmic tapestry.
Gravity twisted sideways, time moved forward, backward, then sideways again. The recruits clung to consciousness, their minds stretched thin. Finally, with a jarring stop, everything snapped back into place. They found themselves standing on a vast, glass-like plain, smooth, endless, reflecting the sky above like a perfect mirror. But the sky was wrong, split into swirling layers of different eras. Storm clouds from one century, drifting satellites from another, stars that belonged to universes they had never visited. Senna staggered, clutching her temple. "This isn't real," she whispered. Arix Talos exhaled slowly. "It's real," he said, "just not ours." The hum returned, steady, electric, resonant, but this time layered, multiple frequencies overlapping, a motif with depth, a signal not from one timeline, but from many. Then the reflections on the glass shifted. The recruits stared at their mirrored images, only to watch them begin to move on their own. One reflection of a recruit stood taller, more confident. Another moved slower, more weary. Another turned its back. Another wore armor unfamiliar to this reality. Senna gasped when her own reflection stepped forward. Only it wasn't her. It looked like her, yes, but older and stronger. Her eyes held knowledge Senna did not yet possess. Arix approached the edge of the mirrored plane. He said, "This is the interline field, a convergence point where parallel timelines resonate close enough to overlap." The older Senna knelt, touching her palm to the glass. Senna hesitated, then mirrored the gesture. Their palms met through the reflective barrier. A jolt surged through her mind. She saw flashes, a battlefield, a victory she had not yet earned, a failure she had barely survived, a decision she had not yet made, a version of herself standing tall in the ruins of a conquered timeline. She gasped and stumbled back, breath quivering. Arix nodded. That was a synchronization pulse, a glimpse of a parallel you. The recruits stared at their reflections, each shifting, morphing, splitting into countless possibilities. Arix continued. Across every timeline, every choice you made or did not make birthed another version of you. Some stronger, some weaker, some broken, some victorious. He raised his hand, and the sky rippled with branching pathways, glowing strands stretching infinitely upward. He said, "Your identity is not a single line. It is a constellation." The hum intensified. One reflection of a recruit stepped out of the mirror entirely, the ground rippling where its foot touched. A stronger version of him, but silent, observing. The recruit trembled. "Is that me?" Arix nodded. "A better you, a worse you, a different you, all depending on what you choose next." He paced slowly across the glass plane. The future regime understands this. They manipulate timelines to weaken your strongest versions and amplify your weakest. But synchronization allows the opposite. You can pull data from your superior variants. He repeated the mantra, "Synchronize upward, aligned with the version that wins." The recruits repeated it, voices reverberating across the mirrored horizon. Arix raised his stabilizer on his wrist. It glowed, projecting a web of timelines, each strand resonating with a different frequency. He said, "To synchronize upward, you must silence the noise, the distortions, the doubts the regime planted. Their signal tries to drown out your strongest selves. But your parallel selves are not gone. They're waiting." Senna stared at her older reflection again. "What do they want from us?" Arix answered softly,
To be chosen. The ground trembled. Some reflections warped into monstrous shadows, representing timelines where fear ruled, where choices collapsed, where the regime had already overwritten identity. Other reflections shone brightly, timelines of strength, clarity, victory. One by one, the reflections stepped forward, hundreds of versions of the recruits, overlapping, converging, surrounding them in a silent circle. Senna whispered, "How do we know which one is the right version?" Arix's voice was steady. "You choose the version that scares you the least and challenges you the most. You choose the one who did what you were too afraid to do. You choose the version who survived what you have not yet faced." He pressed a hand to his stabilizer. It glowed, projecting a web of timelines, each strand resonating with a different frequency. He said, "Now synchronize." The light expanded in a shockwave. The reflections moved together, rushing toward their counterparts. The recruits braced themselves. The merging began. Voices layered. Memories collided. Strength and weakness intertwined. Timelines folded into each other like molten glass being fused. Senna gasped as her mind filled with echoes, her own voice speaking from hundreds of realities. "You are stronger than this. You already survived this. You cannot escape the signal. Choose the upward path." The synchronization pulse intensified. A blinding white burst engulfed the recruits. Then, a scream. Not from the recruits, but from the reflections. A dark version of a recruit, twisted, corrupted by an overwritten timeline, pulled free from the mirror with impossible force. Arix spun around, eyes widening. That's not supposed to happen. The corrupted parallel self stepped forward, shadows dripping from its form. Senna whispered, trembling, "Which timeline is that from?" Arix whispered back, "One where the regime already won." And as the corrupted version charged forward, the entire interline field began to shatter.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. Weaponize Memory as Tactical Intelligence. When the corrupted parallel self burst through the interline field, the glass-like plane shattered into 1,000 spiraling reflections. The recruits fell with it, plunging not downward, but inward, as if being pulled through the hollowed-out marrow of their own timelines. The fall ended, abruptly, in darkness. Not empty darkness, dense darkness, textured like smoke and memory. Senna gasped, Where are we now?" Arix Talos lit the stabilizer on his wrist. Its faint glow pushed back the shadows, just enough to reveal a massive chamber. Cylindrical, metallic, humming with low-frequency resonance. Symbols, ancient, alien, recursive, ran across the walls like circuitry engraved by forgotten civilizations. The hum again. Not external this time. Internal. A vibration rising from their own minds. Arix exhaled sharply. "We've been pulled into the mnemonic core." The recruits exchanged uncertain glances. Arix continued. "This is where the regime stores what it steals. Moments, decisions, and memories harvested from overwritten timelines. They turned memory into a resource. They turned trauma into intelligence." He stepped into the center of the chamber. The floor ignited with concentric rings of light, each ring pulsing like the slow heartbeat of a machine that had been alive for too long. He said, "This is where your past becomes your weapon." The walls around them flickered. Images appeared, glimpses from each recruit's life, moments of pain, regret, grief, lost battles, lost people, lost versions of themselves, memories they had buried, Memories they had lost. Memories they had never lived. Senna's breath caught as she watched an image of her younger self standing alone beneath a flickering hololight, holding the broken remains of a comm chip. A message she never received. A chance she never took. "That never happened," she whispered. Arix's voice echoed gently. "Not here, but it happened somewhere." The recruit stepped closer to the glowing memories. The air vibrated with whispers, echoes of their past selves, fragments of conversations they couldn't remember having. Arix raised his voice. "Listen carefully. The future regime doesn't erase memories because they are painful. It erases them because they contain data. Every hardship, every lesson, every failure you survived is intelligence they don't want you to possess. Painful memories aren't weaknesses. They're encrypted blueprints of survival." He repeated the mantra with force. "Memory is not the wound. Memory is the blueprint." The recruits echoed it, their voices trembling with realization. Arix touched one of the glowing rings. It rippled upward, forming a projection of a battlefield, a place he had once fought in another timeline, a place he had died in another version of himself. He said, "You see this moment. You feel the fear, the pain, the loss. But hidden inside it is everything you need to understand the enemy, their patterns, their strategies, their weaknesses." He stepped back. "Memory is the map. Trauma is the cipher. Decode it." The chamber brightened as the memories intensified, layers upon layers weaving in and out of one another. The air grew warmer, thick, almost alive. One recruit shakily raised his hand. "But how do we weaponize it?" Arix answered without hesitation. "First, re-enter the moment, then reinterpret it. What felt like suffering becomes training. What felt like loss becomes intelligence. What felt like fear becomes pattern recognition." He motioned to Senna. "Show them." Senna swallowed hard. She reached toward the image of her younger self beneath the flickering hololight. As her fingers made contact, she was pulled into the memory. The mnemonic core dissolved around her. She stood in the cold rain of a forgotten night. She saw her younger self, small, uncertain, clutching the broken comm chip, a message she never received, a chance she never took. She remembered the heartbreak, the sense of abandonment, the belief that she had been left behind. But now, she saw something new. The chip wasn't broken by accident. It had been intercepted, edited, repurposed, a subtle early interference from the regime. Her heartbreak had been engineered. She gasped as the realization sank in. "I wasn't weak. I was targeted." The chamber responded. The walls pulsed with sharp, bright light. Arix nodded. "Now use it." Senna inhaled deeply. "Memory is not the wound. Memory is the blueprint." The memory condensed, transforming from an emotional scar into a clear tactical pattern. She saw the signature of the interference, the timing, the method, the fracture point in her timeline. She now understood how they infiltrated her life. She now understood how to stop them. The mnemonic core vibrated violently, recognizing her awakening. Arix steadied himself. She's unlocked a counter-strategy. The chamber's hum escalated, growing deeper, louder, angrier. Senna turned, eyes glowing faintly with synchronized memory light. She whispered, "They know we're decoding them." Arix's expression hardened. "They'll try to shut us out." The chamber shook. Hard. A shadow split across the ceiling. Dark, massive, stretching downward. Senna clutched her chest. That's not a distortion. Arix nodded grimly. No, that's a memory they don't want us to see. The shadow dropped lower, its shape forming. A figure, a silhouette, a presence from deep within the future regime. Its first words cut through the chamber like static-born knives. You were never meant to remember this. The mnemonic mirror exploded with blinding light.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. Establish chrono-dominance through micro-decisions. The explosion of light from the mnemonic core did not burn. It displaced. It peeled the recruits out of the chamber and flung them across a shimmering horizon, one made entirely of suspended moments, frozen in strands like crystallized time. The sky was no longer a sky. It was a latticework of seconds. Bright seconds, dim seconds, broken seconds. Thousands of them drifting like constellations in a universe built from choice instead of stars. Arix Talos hit the ground on one knee, bracing himself against the vertigo. We've been thrown into the micro-sequence field, a region where time is reduced to its smallest unit, decisions. Senna looked around in awe and dread. Each suspended second vibrated with faint whispers, voices, thoughts, impulses that had once flashed through her mind so quickly she barely noticed. "What is this place?" she asked. Arix rose slowly. "This is where your future fractures. This is where they control you." Around them, suspended seconds flickered, fragments of choices they had once made. A hand reaching toward a door, then pulling back. A spark of motivation fading into hesitation. An idea forming only to dissolve under doubt. A step forward reversed into stillness. Thousands of micro-decisions each mapped and catalogued. Arix gestured to the lattice. The future regime does not need to rewrite your major decisions. It only needs to influence the small ones, the ones you make in 5 seconds or less. These are the micro moments that determine your trajectory. He repeated the core directive. Dominate the second. Dominate the timeline. The recruits repeated it, voices echoing like ripples across the luminous seconds. Arix continued, pacing along the shimmering pathways. Every hesitation, every delay, every pause, they are openings, vulnerabilities. The regime exploits your indecision, inserting impulses you believe are your own. A second near them pulsed, showing Senna reaching for a door during training, then freezing as doubt flooded her mind. "That wasn't my doubt," she whispered. Arix nodded. No, it was theirs. He motioned toward another suspended moment, a recruit standing at the edge of a battlefield, paralyzed for a single heartbeat. That heartbeat became a missed opportunity. That missed opportunity became a fatal outcome. That's how they redirect the timeline, not by force, by influence. They do not rewrite your actions, they rewrite your impulses. The hum returned, low, vibrating, threading between the suspended seconds. It felt predatory, watching, waiting. Senna's mind replayed the phrase she had heard before. You cannot escape the signal. She shivered. Arix stepped forward, raising his stabilizer. Watch closely. This is how a timeline changes. He touched one floating second. It glowed brighter, showing a version of him taking a decisive step forward. The moment was strong, clear. Then
The hum intensified. The second flickered. A shadowed impulse slipped in, and Arix reversed the step. Momentum lost. Victory altered. A timeline weakened. The recruits gasped. Arix looked at them with grim determination. This is why you must master micro-decisions. In the 5 seconds when doubt appears, you either solidify your future or surrender it. He repeated the mantra, louder. Dominate the second. Dominate the timeline. The suspended seconds vibrated in response, as if agreeing. Arix motioned toward the shimmering field. To train your cortex against influence, you must begin making deliberate micro-decisions now. For each second you reclaim, your timeline strengthens. For each you lose, the regime's signal grows. He pointed to a glowing second near Senna. Claim it. Senna stepped toward the moment. Inside it, she saw herself at age 14, pausing before running toward a collapsing bridge to help someone. She remembered freezing, not knowing why, feeling the sickening guilt afterward. She reached her hand into the suspended second. Her past self looked at her terrified. She whispered, "You were strong. You were ready. You only hesitated because something else pushed you." She closed her fingers around the second, compressing it into a single sharp point of clarity. The moment burst into a ripple of golden light. Her breath hitched. Arix nodded. You just reclaimed a fractured second. That strengthens every version of you. One by one, the recruits reached for suspended seconds, reclaiming their confidence, their missed courage, their hidden potential. But then, the lattice trembled. The light dimmed. The microseconds around them began to collapse inward, spiraling like dying stars. Senna clutched her head. "They're reacting. They know we're taking control." Arix's stabilizer flashed red. "They're launching an override. They're collapsing this field." The hum grew louder, no longer rhythmic, now chaotic, violent. Senna stumbled backward as a shadow formed at the far end of the horizon, shifting, massive, distorting the seconds around it. Arix's face drained of color. "They're sending an extractor." The recruits tensed. "What's an extractor?" one whispered. Arix answered with a low, rattled voice. "It pulls you out of your own timeline." The micro-sequence field shattered.
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9. Resist Future Indoctrination Algorithms. The micro-sequence field shattered, like a glass universe collapsing inward. The recruits were hurled through a vortex of ruptured seconds, time folding around them in sharp, angular spirals. When they finally hit solid ground, they landed not in a physical space, but a mental one. A dark expanse stretched out around them, a void, a silence thick as gravity. No stars, no sky, only swirling whispers made of thought. Senna clutched her chest. "What is this place?" Arix Talos inhaled through clenched teeth. "This is not a where, this is a who." The void pulsed, and the whispers sharpened into words. "You will not win. You were never strong enough. This path is hopeless. Stand down, break, obey." The recruits staggered, batting away invisible pressure as doubt pressed into their skulls like cold needles. Their breaths shortened, their thoughts clouded. Arix raised his voice sharply. "Listen to me. This isn't your mind. These thoughts are implants, psychological payloads sent from the future, indoctrination algorithms." Senna blinked through the haze.
Algorithms inside our thoughts? Arix nodded grimly. The regime uses temporal psychology. They don't just rewrite timelines, they rewrite belief. They infiltrate your decisions by slipping synthetic thoughts into your mind disguised as your own voice. The void shifted, rippling like disturbed water. New thoughts swarmed the recruits. You are broken. Your strength is a lie. Your memories deceive you. You cannot escape the signal. Senna gasped, recognizing the phrase, the motif that haunted them since the distortions began. "What is real?" she whispered. Arix turned to her. "That question is your shield. It means your mind is trying to detect intrusion." He stepped forward, stabilizer glowing weakly, barely functioning in the mental plane. Indoctrination algorithms begin as small distortions, tiny doubts, impulses, impulses. But the longer you accept them, the more they solidify. They masquerade as truths you believe you created. The whispers grew louder, swirling around the recruits like a storm. One recruit dropped to his knees. I can't tell which thoughts are mine." Arix shouted sharply, voice cutting like a blade through fog. "Identify the intrusion! Ask yourself, does this doubt feel inserted? Does this fear appear too quickly? Does this voice sound foreign beneath the surface?" The void twisted violently as Arix declared, "Reject the implant! Reclaim the mind!" The recruits repeated it weakly. The void grew darker. Arix repeated it louder. "Reject the implant! Reclaim the mind!" The swirling shadows flickered, hesitating. Senna clenched her fists. She focused on her thoughts. There, beneath the noise, she found a thread of her true voice, softer but clearer. "This fear isn't mine. This doubt isn't mine. This voice doesn't belong to me." She inhaled sharply. "I reject the implant." The shadows recoiled from her as though burned. Another recruit followed, then another. Shards of light broke through the void, small but growing. Arix observed them with fierce pride, though exhaustion tugged at the edges of his expression. This is mental resilience. This is timeline autonomy. The regime's greatest weapon is not technology. It is belief. If they control your belief, they control your future. The void pulsed harder. A new voice emerged, colder, smoother, artificial. It spoke in perfect unison from all directions. "Surrender your identity signature." Senna's breath caught. It wasn't a whisper. It was a command. The void tightened, squeezing around them like psychic jaws. Arix stepped forward, though the pressure bent his posture. "They're trying to overwrite you. They want you to confuse their voice with your own." The artificial voice spoke again. "Surrender yourselves. Erase yourselves." Arix roared. "Reject the implant." The recruits joined him. "Reject the implant! Reclaim the mind! Reject the implant!" The void shook. Light cracked through the shadows. But then, the whispers stopped. Abruptly. Completely. Silence dropped like a blade. Arix froze. "That's not good." Senna trembled. "Why did it stop?" Arix swallowed hard. "Because the algorithm is changing strategy. It knows you're resisting." From the center of the void, a shape materialized, blurry, flickering, humanoid. Its form stabilized. It was a person, but not just anyone. Senna's heart stopped. It was her, a future version of her, cold, emotionless, eyes glowing with the regime's signal. Arix's face blanched. "They sent your overwritten self."
Future Senna stepped forward, voice a flat monotone. "You cannot reclaim what I have already surrendered." The void trembled. Senna stumbled backwards, tears forming. Arix whispered, "This is their final tactic, to break you with yourself." Future Senna raised a hand, light gathering in her palm. The void cracked open. Everything was about to collapse. Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. Execute the final temporal reclamation sequence. The void cracked open with a sound like splitting glass and distant thunder rippling through the recruits' minds. Future Senna, cold, overwritten, forged by the regime's algorithms, raised her hand to strike. A beam of pale temporal energy flickered in her palm, humming with a frequency that matched the phrase woven through every chapter of their nightmare. "You cannot escape the signal." Present Senna staggered back. For a heartbeat, she saw her future self not as an enemy, but as a possible end, an identity surrendered, a timeline lost. Her breath trembled in her chest. Arix Talos stepped between them, stabilizer crackling. "You are facing the version you become, but the future is not fixed, not unless you accept it." The void trembled again. Broken thoughts, fractured echoes, futures collapsing into one another. All around them, the recruits' alternate selves flickered like dying holograms, pulled into gravitational wells of corrupted timelines. The regime was tightening its grip. Senna forced her trembling hands into fists. "If that's really me, then I can rewrite her." Arix nodded slowly, voice steady despite the shaking round. "This is the final temporal reclamation sequence, the moment where your past, your present, and your potential converge." He reached for her shoulder. "Only you can execute it." The void shadows surged, listening. Arix spoke loudly, deliberately, each word like the tightening of a lock. "Reclamation begins with acknowledgement. Everything you were, everything you hid, everything they tried to steal." The glowing rings of the mnemonic core, memory, flared back to life around Senna, wrapping her in shimmering light. Memory is the blueprint, yes, but reclamation is the forge. Future Senna lunged, the temporal energy beam slicing through the void like a blade. Senna countered, raising her hand instinctively, and a surge of her own light erupted outward, fueled by every synchronized version of herself from the interline field. Their energies clashed. The void roared. "You cannot defeat what you will become." Future Senna hissed. Senna grit her teeth. "Then I will become something else." The reclamation sequence ignited. The pitch-black void around her dissolved into spiraling fragments of time. Her childhood, a moment of failure, a moment of bravery, every version she had ever been, every version she had refused to be, every path she might still choose. All of it surrounded her like a constellation of selves. Arix's voice pierced the storm. "First phase, reclaim the past." She reached for a shard of memory, one that she had doubted herself, and pulled it into her chest. The doubt dissolved, replaced by clarity. The memory sharpened, became strength. Another shard rushed forward, an older version of her crying, broken. She absorbed that too, not to suffer it again, but to understand it, to wield it. The regime's signal shrieked in protest. Arix called out, "Second phase, reclaim the present." The void stabilized around her center of gravity.
Senna felt her identity lock into place, the signature lock, reinforced by synchronized versions of herself from the interline field. The regime's implanted thoughts slipped off her like water. Her own voice grew louder, clearer, true. Future Senna faltered, the energy in her palm flickering. Senna stepped forward. Arix's voice boomed. Third phase, reclaim the future. The constellation of selves brightened. Paths unfolded like luminous corridors. Possibilities opened. Not one future, hundreds, thousands. Senna chose one, the one that aligned upward, the one that won. She whispered, steady and unbroken, reclaim your time, reclaim your power, reclaim your future. The reclamation sequence reached its apex. Senna raised both hands and the constellation collapsed inward, fueling her with the strength of every version of herself that had ever dared to resist. Light erupted from her, pure and blinding. Future Senna screamed, not in pain, but in dissolution, her overwritten identity unraveling, the regime's algorithms shattering like brittle code. The signal shattered with her. The void cracked open. Light flooded in. And finally, silence. The recruits awoke on the shattered training plaza, the real one this time. No distortions, no loops, no echoes of corrupted timelines. Arix Talos stood at the center, stabilizer glowing steadily. The air smelled of ozone, of endings and beginnings. Senna rose, breathing heavily, but with new strength anchoring her. Arix looked at the recruits, each exhausted, but alive, stabilized, reborn through war. You executed the sequence. You reclaimed more than time. You reclaimed yourselves. The sky shimmered with the faint remnants of fractured timelines knitting themselves together, slowly healing. Arix stepped forward, voice crisp, commanding, proud. You executed the sequence. You reclaimed more than time. You reclaimed yourselves. The sky shimmered with the faint remnants of fractured timelines knitting themselves together, slowly healing. Arix stepped forward, voice crisp, commanding, proud. You executed the sequence. You reclaimed your time. You reclaimed your voice. You reclaimed your future. But just as the rising calm settled over them, a shadow flickered far above the skyline, a ripple in the once stable sky, a temporal distortion, small, quiet, impossible. Arix's eyes narrowed. That shouldn't be there. The signal hummed, distant, faint, not gone. The next war had already begun.
The future attacked first. The regime believed it could rewrite them, weaken them, and scatter their identity across fractured timelines. But through the Chrono-Warrior Initiation Protocol, they learned to recover stolen minutes, anticipate distortions, override loops, weaponize memories, and synchronize with the version of themselves that never breaks. They discovered the truth the future never wanted them to know. Time does not control them. They control time. And now the final sequence begins. From this moment forward, every second is a strategic strike. Every decision is a timeline reclaimed. Every action is a declaration that they cannot be rewritten. This is the moment they rise. This is the moment they anchor the future they choose. Now execute the protocol. Your timeline is waiting for you to take command.